My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sivasankaran, Guru Piran New, fellow Jnanis. Today we are still continuing Mahan's the first principle, the I principle. And I'm going to take a question and answer with Mahan and go through the questions in detail with some illustrations on what this I is and this cosmic intelligence, which Swamiji talks about as the primordial, in the big I. So here, I'm going to pose this this question. So a question came from a disciple that what is the disciple asked Swamiji, what is the nature of God? So what is God, and what is this nature of God? So Swamiji then gives the characteristics of God. He says that no one can create God, and God also cannot create anything except manifest himself as, various things. So God, manifests as everything in this universe. So, and what he says is that God cannot create anything, a substance other than him. So it is a manifestation of God. And we saw in that last few lectures of this potential energy or potential, force, the big I and then the small I. So here we're going to go a little bit more into detail. So Swamiji says that the God also cannot create anything except manifest himself as various things. So, everything is created from or, manifest from God. So part of God's DNA must be within all of us. So we need to be like explorers searching for that God's DNA, divine nectar of awareness, right? So it must be imprinted in all of us. And this is what the exploration that Mahan took. So he goes on to say that which exists in the nothingness as the single and the entire is God. So, he describes now God, this primordial supreme personality or what we call God, or, is part and parcel of this nothingness or the Irul, and he talks about this higher order continuum. What is the relationship between all this? And we'll see shortly. So he then goes on to say that if everything is part of God, he says that even the person who's asking this question is also part of God, you see? And the person who's giving this answer is also part of God. The only difference is that the person who's giving the answer knows that all of this is a manifestation of God, including the person who's asking the question. The person who asked the question is also part of that God. The only thing is that he's not aware or she's not aware of that they are part and parcel of manifestation of God. So he gives this illustration in the I God book of describing how we are all one. Ni nan, nane ni, nium nanum nane nan. He says that you and I are the same, right? Because we both have the same substratum, that big I. So here is an example that I'm going to show this illustration of Swamiji in more detail. So, so we're going to peer into God. And part of God is the universe is a manifestation of God. So if we want to understand the nature of God, then we've got to go to the core of God. And to go to the core of God in its entirety is a little bit challenging because our frequency and our understanding has not expanded. So understanding needs to evolve. Our bandwidth of understanding needs to expand and deepen. So one needs to take a journey, in a staged approach. So what that means is that we've got to peer into God, we've got to peer into our universe first, right? And to understand what our universe is. And this is what the great Mahan, he was observing, the things around him, observing the sky, observing nature, observing himself, And at the same time, even scientists were doing the same thing. They were exploring and observing, the universe out there to see what is all this light out there in this dark sky. So they were very curious. Many people just look up the sky. Oh, okay, we have stars. So we sing our Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and then we go to bed. But these great saints and sages and the scientists, they look up and they explore. They ask the question, why are these stars there? Why is it dark out there? And this is where their journey of exploration starts. So many of them started seeing this entire universe. They saw, lights, they saw stars, they saw many, many things. And they said, there must be something. Are we the only one here? Is our earth the only one here? But we see so many stars out there. Could there be other people there? So these questions emerged for thousands of years. And they started peering into the sky. And then they realized that in all the various scriptures, they talk about Anu, the atom, and they say, there must be something really small that is the building block of this universe. So we see that their thinking started expanding and they saw the stars out there. They saw our earth, they saw our sun, our solar system. And then they realized that we all are part of this universe. And part of the universe manifests in us as our atoms and molecules. And you can go back to all the, great works of the great Mahans, as I gave the earlier quote of in the Tirumandiram, when Tirumula was asked, what is the origin of the entire universe? He says, Anuvul Amainda Peroliye. He says, within the atom, there is a light. What we see, the light outside, is also emanating in the smallest, the most minutest thing in this universe called atom. Scientists were doing the same thing too, and they were coming down to this atom. So they knew through their telescopes that, the universe had a beginning and, atoms and molecules formed. And then they started going deeper. Okay, we have an atom. Within the atom, they have nucleus. So they have protons. Aha, now we have, you know, uh, this light that Tirumoolar was talking about. Mahan talks about the Jodi, and I'll come back to how he discovered his version of this as how the scientists were exploring. Aha, there were, part of this atom, if you go deeper, there is protons and electrons and all the other, components. Electrons emits, you have, photons that emerge as light. So they started going a little bit more deeper. So this is what scientists did, and I'll show you how Mahan did a very parallel. And they discovered this thing called something much more building blocks, called quarks or energy fields, right? Much more subtle that is in that, proton. As they started going deeper, they started getting vibrations. And the beautiful part today is that they realize that every vibration is unique. A particular vibration will give rise to a particular type of small building blocks or energy fields. And those energy fields are what makes up your electrons, protons, neutrons, and the atoms. So as they go deeper and deeper, this vibration that is part and parcel, every vibration creates this new energy field that leads to, all these building blocks. And as they go deeper, this is where it is. They come to the state of nothingness. None of our instruments can pick this up. Today, science calls it dark matter and, dark forces. And this is because this is of a higher order continuum that is how none of our instruments can pick it up. So this building block, so we know that this whole, by peering into the universe, we come to this atom or Anu. As we go deeper and deeper using our various scientific instruments, we've come to that. So ultimately, the entire universe is actually this higher order continuum. And you'll see this imprinted in all of us. And you'll see why this is very important in Mahan's teachings and Mahan's meditation method. So the same imprint is not just in our universe, but the same imprint, you know, this vibration, this unarvu that Mahan calls, is what we call the cosmic intelligence. As I said, every vibration by the string leads to this, small energy fields and the building blocks that gives rise to proton, neutrons, and those combinations lead to atoms and more complex molecules, including carbon and everything that makes all of us up. So we see that this cosmic intelligence, which Swamiji calls Big I, or what scientists call cosmic symphony, is part and parcel of our higher order continuum. And you can ask me, what is this higher order continuum? I can give you some examples of how this is. And I think I've given some examples. So what we see is that this cosmic symphony is what Swamiji calls Unarvu. That is why he says that to discover anything, Unarvu Gavanipa. He says that focus on this vibration, this cosmic vibration. This is exactly what is spoken about in the scriptures called Bhagavan's Geetam. That means God's vibration or God's rhythm, or sometimes they call it the highway to infinity. So many scriptures have captured this vibration, this higher order continuum. Mahan calls it Unarvu. And this has got a very important parallel in the Mahan's version of meditation. So we see that higher order is imprinted in all of us, though many of us may not be aware of it, because all our focus has been on that material universe, which is four-dimensional, three-dimensional space and time. And many of us, we are so caught up with this material world, we don't even, feel our heartbeat. We don't even feel, our own body's vibrations, because we're so caught up with this material things outside. Who said what said, what does the neighbor do? All those things, we're so focused on outside things that we sometimes fail to listen to our body. So Swamiji and then see great Mahans and great saints, they go deeper and deeper. So the pilgrimage is not external, but it's an internal pilgrimage. So we see that, even great scientists talking about this vibration. If you see Nikola Tesla, he says that, if you wish to understand the universe, think of energy, frequency, and vibration. So you see that Swamiji's teachings are consistent with science. As a matter of fact, Swamiji says, there's a quote, he says that nothing without science is useful. So if you want to explain anything, you've got to have some scientific knowledge. So here again, parallel to some of the scientific discoveries, Tesla says that if you really want to understand the universe, you've got to understand energy, frequency, and vibration. If we want to understand ourselves, we have to understand the energy that is within us, the forces that are within us, the frequency that is emanating within us, from us, to us, and also the vibration that we create and generate. So this is what we see. And we see that other scientists also talk about this. You see, if you see Einstein, these are great thinkers about thought. They thought about where does the universe come from. Very similar to what Mahan was thinking. So again, we see that, great scientists like Albert Einstein says that everything is energy, and that's all there is to it. He says, match the frequency of the reality you want, and you cannot help but get that reality. So what he's saying here is that if you stay at the gross level, the vibrations will be at a particular level. If you're at the atomic level or at the molecular level, it's a different vibration. As you go deeper and deeper, you see that ultimately you come to much more subtler vibration. Ultimately, you lead to that higher order continuum or that state of nothingness, the most subtlest. So he says here that, if you want, he says that match the frequency of the reality that you want, and you cannot help but get the reality. That means that if you are at the material level, you get a particular frequency, but as you go deeper, it's a different frequency. It says that it can be no other way. So if you want to see the universe in a most subtlest way, you have to peer through it to go to the most subtlest, characterization. It's the same thing, but it's manifest as more subtler. So from gross to more subtler. He says, this is the philosophy. This is physics. So you see that Mahan's teachings and the scientific teachings are consistent because it is about this reality. Those scientists are taking a more object-driven, experimental-driven. Mahan is using his body, mind, and intellect as the laboratory to peer inside. So we see this beautifully described in science, and there's a kind of a congruence or consistency in Mahan's teachings and this scientific, discussion that we're having. The same thing with our Earth. So we took the grand universe. Let's look at our own Earth. The same imprint is there. We see that we have atoms and protons and quarks and vibrations and and finally this state of higher order continuum. So we see this in our Earth. We see this in all the plants. If you peer through take a leaf and you peer through, use electron microscope, you'll see the molecular level, and you go deeper down to the nucleus, and you get very similar, observations and very similar vibrations. So ultimately, it is also on the same continuum as the Earth. And definitely the next one is actually we humans. So we see that even ourselves, we have atoms and cells, protons, quarks, vibrations, and the higher order continuum. This vibration is what the scriptures were talking about. So if you trail back to that vibration, you come back to the higher order continuum, and you realize that the higher order continuum is that cosmic intelligence or cosmic symphony that we call as Big I or God, that manifests in every facet of our universe, including us. So our body is made out of that. Our whole personality is of that higher order. But because we are standing on a different platform at the material level, our frequency is that level. Hence, we take a very limited, understanding and personality. As we become more and more subtle, ultimately leading to that higher order continuum, our personality starts expanding. Again, Einstein says everything in life is vibrations. It all depends on the vibration that is resonating in our mind. And this is what I want to talk about. Why is it that, Swamiji, how is he characterizing this God in a very subtle way? Let's take our human mind. So we spoke about our body. Let's take our human mind. We have many, many frequency. As a matter of fact, the human mind is what gives us a understanding of this universe. It gives us, this reality. Without the mind, the existence and reality would not be present. So we see that, the human mind gives us how we perceive the universe, how we perceive God, how we perceive things around us, how we perceive ourselves. So as we probe deep down at the material level, we see that, we are caught up. Our human mind is always imprinted by the material frequency, place, time, things that we do, people that come into our lives, things that we the chores that we carry out, the duties and the roles, all these are material in nature. So again, there is a continuum that one experiences. So a lot of our human existence is at the atomic or at the cellular level, in the sense that everything is biology, everything is chemistry. What does that mean? Our emotions, our feelings, the thoughts that we generate, the experiences that we generate, has an impact, in all of our biology. And the biology is what gives us, meaning of life, So if our experiences are challenging, it impacts our mindset, how our brain operates. And also we see that the cells make up our body and our brain. This is the hardware. And if our hardware is not well wired, or if our hardware is not well trained or well nurtured, our experience is very limited. If we don't push our body to exercise or to strengthen the body would not be toned. In that same way, if we don't push our brains or mind to think really creative things, try to think, complex things, push our brain to its, higher order thinking, we see that our understanding becomes very limited. If we are comfortable in what we do and the brain doesn't exercise, doesn't think complex things, you see that the brain starts shrinking, especially when you get older. So we see that most people are at this stage of not wanting to be comfortable, and there's not pushing themselves. So we see that, much of the consciousness is very limited. Even the search for God becomes a mechanical outsourced to everybody else. So there's now much work to think really hard. What is this reality called God? Or what is this? Why is God like this and that? And so asking a lot of questions. So this is one stage of the human mind's consciousness where we are unable to understand anything beyond that limited state of existence because we have not pushed our hardware, both our body and our mind and our brain, to develop deep and wide neural networks. The more deeper we think, the more we introspect, contemplate, reflect, and meditate, we get more deeper and wider and more seamlessly connected neural pathways. If we don't put in the effort, we see that, we have very shallow and also short, connectivity that we are unable to connect things together. Makes sense. Most people are in this, they're caught up with this material identity, and that's what nurtures their personality. So it's got a limited consciousness, and thinking about this complex, substratum becomes a challenging effort. So this is where Mahan's, particularly this Mahan, has taught a simple way on how to go deep down, slowly converging that material experiences, material vibrations into that higher order continuum. So this is where the mind, as it starts commencing into that inward journey, you should watch the thing on the right-hand side. I spoke about this, and I'm going to connect this to the big I and small I identity in this context. So we see that this limited identity, limited consciousness, as one starts practicing meditation, introspection, contemplation, reflection, you start seeing that you move away from the cellular kind of activity, day-to-day activity, material things, and you start getting much more deeper vibrations. You start feeling bioelectromagnetic fields. Those who are practicing Mahan's meditation will know this. After the 21 days of that practicing of meditation, you start feeling a sudden heat. The bioelectromagnetic force field starts, generating, and you start feeling a warm feeling. You start feeling, that is because the neural connectivity in your body has been stimulated, and you're starting to feel a much more higher order of the bioelectromagnetic field. As your mind anchors on it, you see that the mind slowly starts, retreating from the material world and focusing on that beautiful bioelectromagnetic field that is generated from within oneself. And you see that your consciousness starts expanding a little bit more. The reason why is that it's going much more deeper, a little bit more focus, a little bit more concentration, and concentration leads to a little bit more clarity. And the clarity gives you a little bit more, the mental, intellectual capability to cognize the subtle version of you. The earlier version was gross. The subtle was always there, but the mind, which was gross, could not pick up that vibration. As the mind becomes more, makes its journey inward, the mind slowly, reduces its material thought. The mind slowly starts anchoring on that inner force. The bioelectromagnetic force fields are elevated. The neural pathway becomes a little bit more deeper, a little bit more wider, and you see that you start feeling a little bit more blissful feeling, and in that concentrated form, your mind becomes, there's a sense of clarity, and you see that your bandwidth now starts expanding. You feel, I feel things are making a little bit more sense. I feel a little bit more peaceful. I feel a little bit more, things are a little bit more clearer. So you're starting to now anchor from the cellular level or the external biology to a more internal, your forces. As your journey progresses, you start getting glimpses of much more subtle version of yourself. You see that your mind's inner vibration intensify, the material vibration starts to quieten. For a short moment, you get glimpses of that blissful feeling. You've now actually, your mind has now transcended to a different frequency, much more subtler frequency. You see that your consciousness starts expanding because your neural pathway now are much more intensified, and the bandwidth is much more deeper and more connected. So you see that, you're able to now, reduce the material thought even further in a conditional way. Before you could not do it, now you can do it wherever you are, whenever you want. As you start doing, you start getting glimpses of that blissful feeling, because now between material thoughts used to come regularly, but now you get glimpses between every material thought. There's a space, and that space gives you briefly a blissful feeling, that briefly that silent quietude. As you go deeper and deeper, as the mind goes deeper and the neural pathway becomes more deeper. And as you go further, you start getting fully absorbed in that inner vibration. This is the vibration that Swamiji is talking about, this unarva state, the full, a blissful state in the crest eye and also the third eye. And one continuously feel that resonation. This is what the Bhagavan's Gita is. And even that, you see that, the expansion of the brain or the mind becomes more wider, because the hardware, which is the brain, now is forming more deeper and more integrated neural pathway. So now the bandwidth has jumped up significantly, that all you're feeling is the vibration. As a matter of fact, all these were gross, but deep within that gross vibration were these subtle vibrations that gave rise to all this that you're experiencing. And ultimately, the meditation will lead you to that final step, which is even that unarva starts merging to that higher order continuum. You attain that state of paripurnam, that complete. Mahan says, I am that. I, God. This is the ultimate state of that experience. Over many years of intensification, you're able to attain this paripurnam. So this imprint that you ultimately come to the most subtlest that gave rise to everything. As what Einstein says, that what you experience depends on the frequency that you are at. So if you're at the gross level, all you have is a gross experience. As you become more and more subtle and you get to the more subtlest state, you become complete, you get a more universal experience. So this is what Swamiji, this is the big I state that he's talking about, that this is the characteristics of God. God manifests as the higher order continuum Irul. God manifests as strings of vibrations, as quarks, light, protons, cellular level, and ultimately as the gross body and the gross entities. He says God is a manifestation of all of this. So this is what Swamiji then goes on to describe, this characteristics of this God in its entirety. And this cosmic symphony passes across us, in our body and in our mind. And as our body and mind synchronizes, we see that, our vibration becomes more harmonious. As a matter of fact, as our mind becomes more and more, resonate with the cosmic symphony, you see that even the body starts resonating in that same frequency. You see, you become more healthier, more alert, more sharper. Your senses become more attuned. Senses become more, sharper, and bring in information that others would not pick up that you are able to pick up. So everything in your biology starts resonating with this cosmic symphony. And this is what these great scriptures talk about, this Bhagavan's Gita, you know, God's vibration. So when that happens, you see the understanding of the big I is complete. So when you have that paripurnam, your mind is complete, universal, you understand what God is. God manifests as all these different things. You know, we have never been separate. We have always been one, as with God. There is no separateness. And this is where, the whole idea is that when you attain this, as what great scriptures say, that even, God will say, you don't need to come to me. I am there with you. Some scriptures have said this. So this is what Mahan's teaching of I God is. When one attains this big I, the state of completeness and wholesomeness is there. You see God in its entirety, in every different manifestation, in every place, in every interaction, in every person that comes, into your life. You see that everything is divinity, and your lens becomes that big I lens. This is the full characteristics of God that Swamiji highlights. And finally, Swamiji concludes by saying that seeking the inaccessible God by ceaseless subjective inward search, I have realized within myself God in entirety. This is what he's talking about, that completeness, the wholesomeness. And this is the characteristics of this God that Swamiji is talking about when the disciple asks, what is the nature of God? God manifests as everything. And part of the manifestation is us. And if we are able to inspire our mind to be able to touch this cosmic symphony, you see that everything becomes a cosmic symphony. Sandosham.